Hello, everybody. Welcome to my last presentation for this class. And I'm going to be doing it on my methods section for leadership, my upcoming dissertation on leadership and crisis management at community colleges. And since I know Tanisha wants us to keep this to 5 to 7 minutes, I'm just going to kind of blast through this. My methods section was actually about 25 pages, so I'm not going to get into that much detail with this. You can thank me later. Okay, so the bigger problem that I want to discuss is that we live in a crisis-prone society. Crises crop up all the time, as in my experience as a community college employee and leader, that we seem to be constantly dealing with crises, whether the financial or what have you. There's all kinds of different crises, and that a crisis can destabilize the long-term vitality of the organizations, and it can also have a really detrimental impact to the leadership who doesn't manage the crisis appropriately. Because if you can't take that ship back to shore and bring it back to a place of normalcy, you're going to be judged for that as a leader. So it's really important for us to make sure that we're hiring the right leaders who can manage crises, that they have the skills to do that we know what those skills are, and that we provide training for that as well, that there's literature and training to help guide presidents and other executive leaders when they're trying to manage a crisis situation. And there is a very limited amount of literature on this. There is a gap there in the literature as far as, especially in terms of looking at leadership and crisis management at community colleges and universities and higher education. There's a lot of literature on leadership, a lot on crisis management, very little on those two things within the realm of higher education. And higher education is such a unique area that I think it's important to look at that. So there's a gap. My research design is going to be a qualitative, exploratory, multi-site case study. I say qualitative because a case study can be quantitative or qualitative, and this is going to be strictly qualitative. It's exploratory rather than explanatory. So I'm going to be exploring the topic so that other researchers could come after me, and if they find things that they like to investigate further or corroborate, they can do that with quantitative research methodologies or other qualitative to see if a replication can be created. Multi-case site case study. The reason for that is that, while a single case can be very interesting, especially if it's very unique and you want to really get into depth on it, a multi-site adds more credibility to your study because you're looking at multiple sites, and you can make better generalizations by looking at a cross-case analysis of the findings. So that's why I'm going to be doing a multi-site study. I'm also engaging a little bit of arts-based research with this, since that's my background is the arts. As far as the presentation of this, in addition to a dissertation, I'm also going to do some readers' theater with the findings and try to create a presentation that performers can enact for an audience to elicit dialogue around this topic. And I think it's another way to just disseminate information, because very few people will be reading our dissertations, since people just don't go around reading dissertations really. And but the findings could be important, so it's another way of getting that information out to the public. So research questions. The overall research question is how to specific leadership behaviors of community colleges executives influence different stages of the crisis management process. I'm not going to go through all these questions. You can pause this video and read them if you want to know more. But yeah, that's what I have, and it's going to be looking at, my hypothesis is that, there are different stages of the crisis management process, and that different leadership behaviors are going to fit better to those different stages than maybe others. It's kind of involves contingency theory, in that different leadership behaviors are more effective in different contexts. So yeah, that's something to think about and something to explore. And there are the questions I'm going to be asking. Population and sample. I'm going to be using replication logic versus purposeful sampling. Purposeful sampling is often used for case study research, but Yin disagrees with using that because he says it's too confusing with quantitative sampling, and that you might be looking at a sample and be able to generalize to a population, which you can't sometimes do with these types of studies. So he recommends doing replication logic, and that's really looking at trying to find subjects and samples subjects that are similar in nature so that you kind of have the same kind of findings and the same type of people that you're going to be looking at. So I'm going to be looking at community colleges in the Pacific Northwest. That's how I'm going to bound it. Specifically colleges that have gone through a crisis of some sort within the last 5 years. And I'm going to be looking at presidents and executive leaders. In the last 5 years, I think it's important that the crisis is fresh, so people still have a lot of memory about what happened. It hasn't become just lore. People really can remember their lived experience, and that looking at presidents and executive leaders and how they manage the crisis and the things they had to consider, and looking at 5 to 6 cases, so I have a good group of cases to sample to draw data from, and that'll make my findings more robust, and any claims that I make will have more confidence with them. So data collection, I'll be using field notes as I go in and keeping track of those field notes and analyzing them. I'll be conducting semi-structured interviews, so I'll have some outline, protocol with questions that I'll ask everybody, but I'll be free to deviate and with additional questions based on information that arises. And I'll be free to change the questions and change my protocol as new information emerges and I might get taken off into different directions. I'll also be examining other documents around this, and artifacts and news stories and whatever you might have in order to engage in what's called triangulation, so that I'm looking at multiple sources of information to try and corroborate what I'm hearing and make sure that my findings are valid. And I'll keep all of this in a case study database, which I'll probably have on some platform that people will be able to access once my research is done and I've published it. Analysis, I'm using pattern matching logic, and there's 2 types of that. One is non-equivalent dependent variables, looking at non-equivalent dependent variables, and that involves making several predictions about the outcome of an event informed by established theories. So if I take the theories around leadership and crisis management and say, this is what I'll predict will happen in this situation, and I do the research on it, and if the research corroborates what my hypotheses were, then I've got some very valid information to move forward with. If they do not, then I have to go back and reanalyze, and that's a process of inquiry as well. Rival independent variable process is a different pattern matching logic process, and that instead focuses on the variables that led to the outcome, right? And what are the variables that lead to a specific outcome? So if I find, for instance, a series of cases where there was a bad crisis management outcome, well, what are the similar variables across those cases that made that negative outcome possible? So those are different lenses to view pattern matching logic through, and doing cross-case findings around all that. Comparing other cases and taking all of that, turning it into a dissertation and a small performance piece to disseminate the information. So that's my presentation. It's probably over 7 minutes, but it's the end of the quarter. I want to be done. I'm sure you want to be done, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the weekend. And let's all rest up over the next couple weeks for our final full quarter together. I am so looking forward to it, and I'm so looking forward to being done. Take care, everybody.